Today, we're celebrating World Braille Day by introducing you to Stephen Jolley, whose life has been profoundly shaped by Braille. From an early age, Stephen embraced Braille as his primary tool for reading and writing, and it has remained essential throughout his life. With a career spanning IT and media, Braille has played a key role in Stephen's work, helping him stay organized, communicate effectively, and lead projects. Beyond his career, Stephen uses Braille for the convenience it can offer, from labeling personal items to following sports schedules. In 2023, Stephen and his wife, along with a friend, had the opportunity to visit the Louis Braille Museum in Coupvray, just outside Paris. The experience left a lasting impact on him, as he found the hour and a half spent there to be profoundly moving, offering deeper insights into the life and legacy of Louis Braille. Join us as we hear from Stephen about how Braille has empowered him, shaped his independence, and continues to make a difference in his life. Can you share some of the early experiences that helped shape your connection with Braille? How did it impact your education and social interactions?
My first real consciousness of Braille in a meaningful way was when I was at school. I was in, I guess, prep. I was 5 years old. My teacher had given me a little book, and she wanted me to read the book. She'd obviously spent a fair bit of time beforehand sort of explaining to me about the dots and the letters and things like that. Anyway, one day I just walked over to her after having the book for some time, and I said, "I've finished it." She said, "You've finished it, darling?" Yes, I've finished it, like as if that's what I was supposed to do. And she was over the moon. And that made me realize that something really significant had happened. In her mind, there was a breakthrough. Little Stephen had read his first Braille book. So that stuck with me.
And how do you remember how young you were at the time?
I was about 5, I think. 5 or
5. So already reading
almost
Braille
6.
at 5.
Yeah. I was lucky going to a school for the blind where Braille was just a natural thing that you would teach parallel with people learning to read and write the normal way by looking at the print.
Are you glad that you had such an early start and engagement with it?
Oh, that was terrific, yes, because I think we tend to learn things like that better the earlier we do. So having that early exposure to it was, I think, a very good thing for me, and meant that Braille was no issue for me, as I went on.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious to hear more about how Braille has played a role in your career and which fields you might have used it in that could surprise others.
My first job that I was really looking for, apart from sort of part-time jobs while I was looking for a job, was in the computer industry. I wanted to be a computer programmer. And one of the challenges was, how was I going to read what other people would print out from the computer? This was even before screens. What I did was use a technique that had been developed by other people in other parts of the world of enabling the computer printer to print on a softer backing than normal. There was a piece of rubber put behind the print hammers, and when it hit, it made impressions in the page. And we wrote a program, or they wrote a program for me, that turned characters into patterns of dots, like the Braille characters. So that was a way I could get Braille using the computer. Now, if I didn't have Braille, I wouldn't have been able to read the output from the computer. I wouldn't have had the job. I wouldn't have had my 20 years in the IT industry.
So basically, whatever you put into the computer or system, it would spit it out into Braille for you to read.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah. Pretty
And that
nifty.
helped. Yeah, and that helped you for what would you say for the majority of your career in
Well,
IT?
it got me the start. I don't think I would have got the start without that. We then had other ways of reading the output from the computer, which became more convenient. There was a device that was around in the late 70s called the Opticon, which had a little camera in it, which you moved across the page. It looked at the printed character and turned it into vibrating pins, and you could read the characters that way. So I didn't need to use Braille to read from the computer that way. And then, of course, we moved on in the 80s to having speech coming out of computers, which was a good way of getting the information out.
Well, you mentioned you've talked kind of a bit about how Braille helped you in your IT career, but I also know that you've worked in radio and that sort of media space. Do you think
Mm.
there's still use for it there? And if so, how did it help you?
Oh, Braille has helped me a lot in my work. Um, I used to go to air some of the time. I still do go to air some of the time, and I work from Braille scripts or Braille notes. Couldn't do that so easily having audio in my ear, though there are some that do it, like the legendary uh, Naz Campanella, who's with ABC Current Affairs Radio, and she uses JAWS to provide her with what she needs to speak. That's brilliant the way she does that. Braille is a more convenient way to do it. To have stuff under your fingertips when I need to speak to a group of people, great to have the Braille notes in front of me. So Braille's been very good for lots of ways in my work, just for quick note taking, being able to refer to things very quickly without having to go to a device to look up a file, etc.
So do you think there's a case where it can support that sort of better comprehension compared to audio or other assistive technologies?
Yes, I do believe that Braille gives one the literacy that's really important. Synthetic speech is a more efficient way to get the content, to get more content. It costs less. It's very fast. We can read at hundreds of words per minute. It's hard to read Braille at that rate. Um, so that's a very good way to get lots of information. If I'm reading about a particular topic, the speech is a good way to do it. But if I want to concentrate on people's names, the way I learnt about punctuation, the way I learnt about setting out, formatting, it was Braille that did that. You can't get that from just listening to a stream of words.
It's basically like a literary device or tool in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, it does give you the literacy, so it keeps you on track with how words are spoken. I liken it a bit to, we once had radio, then we had television, and you couldn't say just because television's here, no need for radio now, because each of them was appropriate in their particular setting. And that's the same with Braille and audio.
Well, we've talked a bit about Braille in the sort of professional context, but I'm curious to hear if it's enabled greater independence in your daily life and what advice you would give to others who are just starting to learn Braille for similar purposes.
Oh, there's lots of ways I use it in my daily life. For decades, I've made sure that on the coffee table in the lounge room in the wintertime is a football fixture in Braille, and the summer a cricket fixture in Braille. I can just go and pick it up. Don't have to get a device out and find where the fixture is and wind it backwards and forwards and all that sort of thing. So Braille's been great for instant access to information. Um, if I need to do a transaction like banking transactions, I write things down in Braille first, and then I can go and enter those numbers. It's harder to do if you're doing it with audio. So my preferred way of doing it is with Braille. There's just lots of ways you use Braille without even sort of thinking about it. Labeling. In the old days, we used to label cassettes a lot and CDs in Braille, and that certainly gives you independence.
Would you say for someone who's just learning or starting to learn how to use Braille, that would be a good way to weave it into their day to day?
Yes. Don't think about Braille as an alternate way I'll be able to read books. Think about it as an alternate way I'll be able to read and write. And in your daily life, that might be for very simple things like labeling what's in the pantry. And then it might develop that you use Braille labeling on your medication. So those little containers that you have can have the Braille letters on them for the days of the week, say, whatever they might be. And then just progressively use Braille. People need to have realistic expectations about Braille in their life. It's harder for Braille to be as fluid a tool the older you are as you learn it. You know, if I tried to learn it now, it would be much harder than what it was when I was 5 years old. So we have to be aware of that and respect that, but you can still have very good reasons for picking up Braille and starting to come to grips with it.
Well, how can you share a bit about how Braille has helped shape your personal life? Do you have any meaningful stories or experiences where Braille had a direct positive impact on your day to day?
Well, there is a story I would like to tell you. In 2023, my wife and I and a very good friend of ours visited the UK for a few weeks, and then we spent a week in Paris. And part of that time in Paris, well, was just out of Paris, about 50 k's out, hour's trip. We visited the Louis Braille Museum. It's a humble little building where, which was the family home for Louis Braille. He was born in 1809, and it's been preserved. And now there's a marvelous little museum there, which has got lots of historical stuff. Some of the furniture from the house in those days, if not the furniture, certainly, you know, look-alike furniture. So there was the dining room table and things like that. There was some Braille writing equipment from the very early days through to the modern times, and then some old volumes of Braille. But for me, that was really special to be at this place where the man who devised the Braille system lived and grew up, and here was the museum for him. And I felt quite a responsibility actually to be there. I felt I really needed to take it in because there were many people in my country who would love to have been there, who are really passionate about Braille. And I was one of the few Australians who have got there. And it was really special.
How you mentioned that you were sort of there on a bit of a tour. Do you remember how long the tour was and what they sort of did when they took you around?
Yes, we were there, I think, about an hour and a half. So we had sort of a tour of, the first thing we did was saw a model of the building, a three-dimensional model, which was really very handy to look at. Then we visited some of the rooms, the workshop area, and other rooms, and then sat down and had a yarn about the history of Braille.
It sounds like a really beautiful experience, especially in Paris. Wow.
Yeah, it was terrific. One of those things you think I must soak this up. This is really special.
Well, no regrets learning more about Braille, I suppose.
No, that's quite true. But yes, Braille's just been there all my life. It's sort of in the background usually, but it's the way I read and write, communicate with other people sometimes. As a kid, I read lots of books in Braille. Much sleep I should have had, I didn't have because I was snugly reading a book under the blankets like lots of other blind kids do. And yeah, it's been a great friend.
I'm glad it's been a good friend to you, and I hope for many others. Well, thank you for sharing your story about Braille and where it's taken you and the places you've been because of it.
Good on you, Amelia. Thanks for talking to me about it.